make pesticide-free, we cultivate pesticide-free, DOH compliant legal cannabis. I am also the president of the Cannabis Alliance, which is a nonprofit dedicated to a vital, ethical, and sustainable cannabis industry. So basically what we do is we're made up of all types of people, from retailers and labs and businesses and patients and consumers, and we try to create good policy and education around that. But that's all I want to talk about myself. So you guys are here for the Sustainability and Responsible Cultivation panel. We're going to let all of these fantastic people up here take a few minutes to introduce themselves and tell us why they're sitting here.
Hello, my name is Danielle Rosellison, and owner-operator of Trailblazer Productions with Danielle here. We are one of the few 100% LED grown facilities in the state. We also use a lot of beneficial insects, microorganisms in our IPM system. And I've also created a water reclamation system, which has resulted in using about 1/10 of the water that I would normally use to cultivate cannabis. And those are all probably really good reasons for being on a responsible cultivation panel.
Hi, my name is Kristen Nevedal. I'm with the International Cannabis Farmers Association. We're a nonprofit organization that is focused on helping to empower traditional sun-grown farmers through education, research, and advocacy. I've been a cultivator for 20 years. I'm in California. Long history of outdoor cultivation, but also botanical medicine. So my background pre-cannabis was Chinese medicine. So for me, cannabis is another tool in the toolbox. I'm an outdoor, organic, no-till farmer, and just bring cannabis right into that realm. And then the work that we've been doing on public policy is helping to ensure that cannabis can actually be farmed, that farmers have the opportunity to put their cannabis in the ground under the full sun and cultivate and farm in the carrying capacity of the property that they are on, the watershed that they are in. And so that might look different in different locations, but that's our mission. That's what we've been working on. I've been working on for probably 18 years now.
What's your title?
I'm the chairperson. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Derrick Smith. I'm Executive Director of Resource Innovation Institute. We're a nonprofit working throughout North America to promote and quantify resource efficiency in cannabis, so energy, carbon, water, waste. What we're doing is tracking how much of that is used in different types of cultivation settings, indoor, outdoor, greenhouse. Ultimately, we're helping facilitate best practices among growers by getting folks together in multiple stakeholder settings where we can actually advance conversations so that we can move out of the secretive illicit market days and into the era where we're exchanging best practices and advancing what's good for the industry. We're influencing policy, we're supporting manufacturers who are producing technology that is making things more efficient to connect to the marketplace. And why am I here? I think was the part of your question was, I've worked on sustainability issues for 20 years in a variety of different environments, forestry, agriculture, finished goods of a number of kinds. And I've never seen a bigger opportunity to have a positive impact on climate change than by focusing here. So I'm totally honored to speak with all these leaders because it's really these types of leaders that will move this industry forward as I've seen in other industries. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing 2 cameras.
Thanks, Derrick. I'm Jeremy Moberg. I'm founder and president of the Washington Sun Growers Industry Association, which is, as it says in its name, a special interest group representing sun growers. The earlier incarnation of the WSAA was the Okanagan Cannabis Association, and under that I lobbied for the legalization of outdoor growing. Essentially, the very first draft rules that came out of the LCB were not even going to allow sun growing. So it was, I teamed up with Buffalo Mazzetti, who was a longtime environmental activist who had successfully stopped a open pit gold mine, which would have been the first in Washington. There's a long history of his activism and really cool guy, and we went and gave the LCB a different outlook. They had the impression that you could only grow weed indoors. and they were pretty clueless. So that, along with some research that was kind of showing the huge impact that indoor growing was having on the nation, both in terms of carbon and electricity, was huge. 1% of the state's power. So they listened and did that. And now, as the WSIA, we're pushing for sensible regulation, and we're actually having to fight back quite a bit too. But we're pushing for sensible regulation, and we're an industry trade group. Personally, I own Cannabis Farms, owned and operate Cannabis Farms for 4 years. We were the first sun growers that were to market, and before they asked you if it was outdoor weed, and those days were great. They were short-lived, but at first they didn't ask, and they loved it. It was, some of the early indoor was kind of having some hiccups, and we had a good crop, and people's first impression of weed in like the Vancouver area and some of the first stores were sun grown. All right.
So you said the LCD was clueless, as in past tense?
Yeah, right.
In your opinion, this is kind of the whole panel, so jump in any way you want to. In your opinion, what does responsible cultivation mean? Like, can anybody be responsible cultivation? Is it a tier 3 indoor responsible cultivation?
I'm gonna try to be really nice, Danielle.
Thanks.
Why would you start with that question, though? We could have worked up to it, I think.
Sometimes.
I'm of the opinion that no, there's clear distinctions of what can be called sustainable, and there's clear definitions. And the problem here is that this is it's a recreational use drug crop. Now, if there's scenarios where we need lab conditions to grow weed in order to make medicine, I can understand that. And I want doctors fulfilling those subscriptions and whatnot. And the Department of Health and the qualifications you guys have at your farm, I think fit that bill. But I think the distinction has to be made that there is really only one truly form of sustainable cannabis, and that's if it's grown under the sun.
I think that we're talking about two different things here, possibly, right? So responsibility versus sustainability, I think those have some different meanings. So when I've had the privilege of working a lot on public policy throughout the U.S., as well as a little bit overseas, and responsible cultivation is how you operate, from my opinion, how you operate within the parameters that are forced upon you by the regulatory system in the very best way you can. How do you walk the walk of the very best practices of really being the most mindful? You might never actually meet sustainability as we think of it from an agricultural perspective because of regulatory constrictions. And so, like, when I think about, as cultivators, how we act responsibly, it's constantly finding a way to green and improve and close loops within our cultivation practices and our systems. And that's a harder field to hoe, depending on what state you're in, and then within the state, what municipality you're in, because you're so incredibly limited as a cannabis cultivator by regulations. We don't get to go out and farm. Like, that's a rare opportunity. I remember when Washington allowed sun-grown licenses. I'm in California. It's like, in the US, it feels like a mecca of sun-grown. I'm from Humboldt, so I was just tickled. I was like, oh my God, someone's finally gonna do it. There will be licensed outdoor fields, right? That was a huge step. We have a long ways to go in public policy. And then sustainability, I don't know that, like I said, that it's gonna be hard for you guys indoors to really hit a sustainable, if we look at other agricultural crops, right, and how we would think about sustainability and living soil and closing the loops and growing the nutrients on site. That's hard. That's going to be way harder than for me or for Jeremy, who can put their crops in the ground. I mean, we have farmers in Humboldt that are dry farming with no nutrients, no water in alluvial floodplains. Like, they're so much closer just to start. So.
Well, I think that one of the things that I'd like to mention on is that we are here at the Hempfest and we're talking about cannabis and recreational, medicinal, kind of in the same realm. But one thing when you talk about sustainable and responsible cultivation, you talk about big agriculture. It's like, okay, you're growing under the sun, so you're not using electricity. Point. But when you have massive monocrops, where pesticides are being used, I'm talking about agriculture in general, and the soils have been stripped from all beneficial insects, and you're using synthetic nutrients. And I'm not talking about cannabis, I'm talking about big ag in general, and then you have to ship that agriculture all over the country, if not all over the world. Your carbon footprint gets pretty big pretty quick. And so, like, in looking, one of the things that I look at in this bigger picture of agriculture is, and where I am today, and trying to connect these dots, is I'm 100% LED grown facility, and a lot of these lighting manufacturing companies are using this industry to find out what is the best spectrums and the best systems to use for indoor agriculture, in a sense of it someday, with global climate change and over agriculture use of a lot of our farmlands, we will likely be forced into producing our lettuce and our leafy greens within indoor vertical LED lit farms. And so the technology that's going to be used in those days, I think, is being designed today with cannabis. So I took a lot bigger look of sustainability and responsibility than just power.
Kristen, you raised your hand, and then I'll go over and then Derrick, because you're impartial.
It's gonna regulate us.
Trying to be impartial.
Get used to it.
You know, when we look at it, I agree with the big ag analogy. The big ag analogy is really challenging, but I don't necessarily think that we have to continue down that road, right? So we have studies and information that has come out on a global level and been presented by the UN about the power of cultivating regionally. We grow our food, we do intensive agriculture in small, on a small level throughout the region where we're in, and we specialize on keeping our products close to home. I think cannabis offers an amazing opportunity for that. I mean, especially because, well, we're federally restricted and we can't cross state borders. So if we had, in locations where we have this sensible regulatory policy, we have an opportunity to adopt all of those very high standards that actually they veer us off that course of industrial ag.
Yeah, I don't want to live in the world that you're talking about if we end up there, and I don't want to raise my children in that world. So I really, the kind of the technology is going to save us argument is, I don't know, it feels like giving up, and it feels like a lack of sort of social responsibility by maybe the regulators. At this point, I don't really want the regulators to come in and say that this is a bad idea, that we're using electricity to grow marijuana, although that might have been a good idea like 4 years ago, and they missed that boat. At this point, I think that the markets should push it, which is a pretty compromised position to Kristen, that is actually pushing for legislation in California to make indoor growing illegal. And there may be laws on the books that carbon estimates, or carbon levels reduction levels they have to hit, that may not even allow indoor in California. So they might kind of be forced into passing a law and not having it there. But I think what we really need in Washington, I think the way that we can improve the sustainability of the industry is to make a clear distinction in the consumer's mind about what organic is. And we have an opportunity, organic and sustainable, kind of using the words interchangeably, because I believe they are interchangeable and they should be. And when organic's not sustainable, it's a real problem. And I'm sure it'll come up maybe later, but the organic cannabis standard that is currently being developed really needs to reflect to the consumer that it is grown in soil under the sun. That's what organic means to the consumer, and that's what we need. And if that happens, that will have such a big impact. It will be the first market disruptor we see in this industry in a long time, and it'll push consumers towards sustainable selection, and that's really where we need. I'm afraid that the USDA or the WSDA is going to back down on that, as we saw in their latest release, where they seem to not want to do that. They're actually going to give it to indoor growers, and the real sad part about this is that the indoor growers are actually going to get it much easier, because they are not going to have the 3-year field requirement to be organic. And so it's going to actually even be worse. And once again, sun growers getting the short end of the stick.
So, yeah, I would agree with a lot of the points that responsible is a subjective term, right? But it does, and sustainable is relatively a subjective term. None of us lives a sustainable life. We can all do better, no matter what we're doing. I agree that just because something is sun-grown does not mean it's organic and sustainable by any stretch, as we see in big ag. And I do believe that indoor production can be carbon-free, possibly, right? That's in the abstract, and that's a long consideration. But again, responsibility in business means you're transparent. There's a lot of lack of transparency in this industry, from farms all the way through supply chains, and it also means that you're trying to advance the industry while advancing your business, and that's why, again, we are trying not to take a position on which type of cultivation is right or sustainable. We're trying to track resource use and help experts like growers who actually know what they're doing and are open-minded and are open-hearted and are open in their conversations. We want to create venues where they can exchange best practices, and ultimately, once we collect enough data, we can determine what is good performance, what is bad performance, and make a little bit more of an objective analysis rather than throwing out subjective terms. And then we'll be able to define what is, good and bad in the future as we get more data. We don't have any data in this industry, so it's pretty much anything you hear is going to be subjective. And ultimately, I agree, consumers and shareholders, when we have a lot of public companies and even privately held companies, the shareholders are going to need to be pushing on transparency and data and really understanding how people are performing relative to benchmarks. These are normal conversations in mature industries. This is a relatively immature industry in many, many ways, and we'll get there. And these conversations help.
So, as president of the Cannabis Alliance, our members have voted that clarifying cannabis agriculture has been their top priority for the last 4 years. California, before it was even adult use was legal, you guys passed a bill that said cannabis is agriculture. Kristen, why is this important, and how has that kind of helped shape it to play things out, or not?
Yeah, I think that we're not is a really big statement there. California, you're absolutely right. And it was super important for us to be in or regulated by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. That was really a lot of the goal with that. And California, it's estimated that 80% of the cannabis produced in California is grown outdoors, right? But our representation on the shelves in the legal marketplace is around 20% probably. So how do you regulate that? California was in this interesting juxtaposition of a 20-year industry that had developed. It was relatively safe. In some places it had local authorization or affirmative defense opportunities to operate businesses, but no statewide regulation. So, we really thought that being in the Department of Agriculture meant that we would farm, that we would be able to, get a producer and handler certificate from CDFA and be subject to agricultural inspections and have the ag extension offices available to us to help us. And basically what happened is, after passing cannabis as agriculture, they passed another bill that stripped out the right to farm in California. So you have no right to farm cannabis even though it's agriculture. And then we saw this kind of same. One of the things that regulators really like to do is they like to look at regulations in other areas and say, okay, the sky didn't fall. Great, sky didn't fall, let's just adopt that. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And there's very few outdoor cannabis operations throughout the U.S. Washington has a pathway, Oregon has a pathway, Arizona's just creating a pathway. But those pathways help to birth, some outdoor cultivation. And California has really struggled with embracing their outdoor cultivation. So they have put incredibly onerous regulations on their cannabis cultivators, especially their outdoor cultivators. And because we've had a long history of unregulated activity in California, a lot of trespass cultivation on our BLM, our forest lands, our even large private holdings, those have been very environmentally damaging. The state has taken the position that that's what they're regulating, are these trespass cultivation sites, and that's how they treat basically all outdoor cultivators. So, for example, as soon as you enclose your cultivation and the rain never touches the earth that you cultivate on, you aren't subject to agricultural discharge laws, right? Okay, awesome. I can dry farm with no nutrients and have to put together a multi-$1,000 agricultural discharge water resource protection program, and no insult to anyone who's cultivating indoors, but indoor cultivators, greenhouse cultivators, hydroponic cultivators that are enclosed, they don't have to worry about any of that. They don't have to document their water usage. They don't have to store their water for 6 months out of the year. So, yay, agriculture.
You chime in there? You look like you want to.
Yeah, I would. Well, California had such a kind of a media problem too with all the outdoor. It was like when I first started looking into sustainability of cannabis, like in 2010, 2011, the only articles that have been written is like how awful the outdoor growing was in Northern California. And it's like, oh God, this is not good for my cause, and so when a lot of people you would talk about sustainability, and they'd be like, oh, that outdoors in California is terrible. So I think we suffered from that in California for sure.
Oh, definitely. And I think we have a 20-year history of cultivation in California in the public eye, right? Since Proposition 215. But we have never, ever, ever had a cultivation permitting program in the state, except for the 9.31 program in Mendocino County that lasted about a year and a half. It was pretty solely for outdoor cultivators, and it allowed 99 plants. This was back in like 2009 through 2012 when the federal U.S. attorneys in the state said, oh, that's not ever going to happen again, and they shut it down. So unregulated cannabis is an environmental issue. Like, there's no way around it. But the media has never talked about unregulated cannabis. They've talked about outdoor cannabis and sun-grown cannabis, and they've attached all those words to it. It's not trespass cannabis or unregulated, renegade, guerrilla-style cannabis. It's outdoor cannabis that's been attached to it, and that is where we've really struggled to outgrow and overcome the nomenclature that has been really crossed up, mixed up.
And we need to recognize too that legalization has moved us towards more sustainability, and that the black market was not sustainable. I mean, when I first started growing indoor weed, we were scared shitless, and I would, I disposed of my rock wool in the river. And it was like, I knew I wasn't gonna get caught. I can put it in the garbage. I can't drive it to the dump. I cannot do anything with it without the risk of going to jail. So I went through it in the river. It was terrible. I can't believe I'm admitting it.
I can't believe you're admitting that.
Well, and I did diesel grows too. Like, I have some repenting to do, but you know what? That was under prohibition, and I could justify it, and I'll do it again if it's illegal, but it's not anymore. So we have to be a lot more action derived to really change this. But to the question about whether it's agriculture, it kind of encompasses the entire dichotomy of sustainability that we're kind of hitting on, and these distinctions or degrees of distinctions between sustainability and kind of the spectrum of indoor and outdoor. And it gets kind of muddy really quick. Do you say cannabis is ag just blankly, and then that gives people operating in industrial zones like ag rights? Probably not. So there's such a distinction between the methodologies that it's difficult to give the entire plant agricultural status. Now, if you look and smell like a farm, I think you should be treated like a farm. And if you look and smell like a factory, I think you should be zoned and regulated as a factory.
Moberg and Jetty, as a licensee, what steps have you guys taken to cultivate responsibly? Fertilizers, pest management, water, all that stuff.
Well, as stated before, I've committed to being 100% LED grown from the beginning. My facility was designed to be that way. I committed from day one before I ever put an LED light in the facility. The lighting is about half of what I would have normally used under HID fixtures for just to power the lights. I'm using about 60% less of the power that would normally be used to cool those growing rooms down. And so as of now, that's where I am at with power consumption. I don't own the building, so as far as trying to get solar power panels and batteries to offset my draw on the grid, I'm not willing to do that to a building that's not mine. If I'm able to buy the building in the future, I might entertain going that route. Furthermore, I was using about 200 to 250 gallons of water about 20 times per flower cycle, and I've created a water reclamation system that I'm able to use about 10% of the water that I was using previously. And I'm in Bellingham. We have plenty of water, so it's not because I'm limited by any means. It's just because that's what seems right for me to do, and I might be able to set up operations in another state that might not have as much water as I have, and that skill will become advantageous. I use Botanicare nutrients. It's organic-ish. It's not 100% organic, but really soon here I'm going to be with the organization with the organic certification coming down the line. I'm going to be looking towards making more of a top dress or super soil media to grow organic in. I don't use any chemical pesticides. I use biological beneficial insects to maintain my flower rooms and veg rooms, and always looking to improve and make better and more sustainable, more responsible. Every chance I can get that doesn't cost too much.
The question was, what do I do differently?
Yeah, what steps have you taken to cultivate responsibly?
Well, ever since the diesel grow, I think that everything's been pretty good. Mostly.
What's a diesel grow?
A diesel powered grow, you know. You don't know the California lingo.
We're in Washington, I'm pretty sure.
When you had to make your own power in diesel. Yeah, so we do all living soil. I won't let bags. I try to reduce the amount of bags that come. So our original soil that we got for our farm was all locally sourced from my Hypnum. What are they called? Hypnum. It's like a bog. I guess it was an old bog. And that was shipped down to our local soil mixer, who actually certifies it organic and mixes it with some aged wood chips. And then I fill and drilled all of my holes, and I'm still growing in that same soil, and I'm year 5. That's true living soil. So there's a way to think about nutrients. You can either think about them as a stream, or you can think about them as a bucket. And a stream just continually flows, and will always be moving through. As you're adding nutrients, they're just going through, and unfortunately they're ending up in the drain, ending up potentially in the aquifer, having to be cleaned by the local municipality, which is essentially a tax on people that probably don't even smoke marijuana, and they're now paying to clean